Hi, this is Matt Baker. Welcome to our annual review of the best fan-made charts of the year. This is our 4th year in a row doing this, and every year I'm blown away by the quality of the charts. In case you didn't know, Useful Charts has a community over on Reddit, where fans of the channel post their own creations, sometimes related to the content of the channel, and sometimes on brand new topics. We currently have 20,000 members, so if you're a Reddit user and haven't yet joined, I encourage you to do that now. I'll leave a link in the description. Next, I want to give a shout out to all of my supporters over on Patreon, especially those at the Count/Countess level and the Duke/Duchess level. I'll leave a link to my Patreon in the description as well. Okay, let's get to it. First off, take note that this video is going to have 3 parts. First, I'm going to take a look at some of my personal favorites. Then I'm going to count down the top 10 posts of 2023 based on upvotes. Finally, I'm going to be announcing the winners of the Reddit contest, in which 2 charts were chosen to be printed by our company. So you'll have the opportunity to buy one of these limited edition fan-made charts if you like what you see. All right, here is my first pick. As you might know, I did an 8-part series on the family tree of Christian denominations this year, so we got quite a few fan-made charts related to this topic. On this chart, each icon represents a denomination, and the big circles represent communions, which are basically large organizations made up of denominations that have a lot in common. Let's start on the Protestant side. The 4 largest Protestant communions are the World Lutheran Federation, the World Communion of Reformed Churches, the World Methodist Council, and the Anglican Communion. What you'll notice right away is that there are some denominations that belong to more than one of these families. For example, the Evangelical Church of Germany is both Lutheran and Reformed. The Church of South India is both Anglican and Methodist. And the United Church of Canada is both Methodist and Reformed. Also, one organization that I didn't mention in my series was the Porvoo Communion, which is a grouping of several Lutheran and Anglican churches in Europe. Now, another thing you'll notice is that there is actually more than one Lutheran communion, and the same goes for Reformed and other denominational families. So, for example, in the US, the more liberal Evangelical Lutheran Church of America belongs to the World Lutheran Federation, whereas the more conservative Lutheran Church Missouri Synod belongs to the International Lutheran Council. I also want to point out what's going on with the Anglicans, because this could be important in the years ahead, as there is the potential for a major split over the issue of same-sex blessings. So, in addition to the main Anglican Communion, 2 new organizations have recently been formed, known as GAFCON and the Global South Fellowship. For now, most of their members are also still members of the main Anglican Communion, although in February, they cut ties with the current Archbishop of Canterbury, so it's yet to be seen how things will work out. To the right of the Anglicans, you can see the Eastern Orthodox Communion and the current schism that exists there between Constantinople and Russia. Finally, I want to point out what this designer has done with the Catholics. The smaller circle at the bottom represents the Eastern churches, whereas the big circle at the top is the Latin Church, by far the largest church in all of Christendom. But here, the chart maker has also shown all the various Catholic orders and societies, such as the Franciscans and Jesuits. I also enjoyed this chart by the same creator, which goes through the various different liturgical rites used by different churches. You can see that they all go back to the instigation of the Lord's Supper. The main Latin rite used by most Catholic churches is this red line here, and the main rite used by most Eastern Orthodox churches, called the Byzantine rite, is this thick blue line. The Catholic one, together with the Coptic rite, traces its roots back to Peter and Mark, whereas the Orthodox one traces its roots back to Paul. But then there is also the West Syriac rite, used in Antioch, shown in gray. The East Syriac rite, shown in green. That one's used by the Church of the East, as well as in India. Then finally, there's the Armenian rite, shown in yellow. All 3 of these bottom ones trace their origins back to the Didache, an early Christian book that did not make it into the New Testament. Now, before I move on, I should mention that if you want to get a better look at any of these charts, you can just go to the Reddit link in the description and search for it there. You can even download the charts. Just make sure that you credit the author of each one if you share them online. Okay, staying on the topic of religion, what we have here is the family tree of Joseph Smith, founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, better known to outsiders as the Mormons. Now, what's neat about this chart is that it also shows other information about early Mormonism, such as who the 12 witnesses were, i.e., those who said that they saw the golden plates, which Smith supposedly found and translated as the Book of Mormon. They mostly include members of his own family, his father plus 2 of his brothers, as well as 8 members of the Whitmer family, the mother, 5 sons, and 2 sons-in-law. So what this tells me is that the 12 witnesses weren't really the most diverse group. This chart also shows many of the presidents of the church who served after the death of Joseph Smith. Surprisingly, 10 out of the next 12 can be somehow connected to each other genealogically, either by blood or marriage. In fact, 2 were very close relatives of Joseph Smith, his nephew and that nephew's son. Then there's the Joseph Smith dynasty itself, which went on to lead not the main LDS church, but one of the smaller branches of Mormonism, now known as the Community of Christ. It was first led by Joseph Smith's son, Joseph III, and then by 3 of his grandsons and 1 of his great-grandsons, taking us all the way up to 1996. Finally, you'll also find the science fiction writer Orson Scott Card on this chart. He wrote Ender's Game, and interestingly to me, is a great-grandson of Brigham Young, the second leader of the church. I also didn't know that his first cousin once removed, Zola, was married to Rulon Jeffs, the father of the notorious cult leader and child sex offender Warren Jeffs. Okay, moving on to something totally different. This chart was actually made by the same person as the last one, but unlike most of the family trees that get posted on the subreddit, this one is made up of horses instead of people. Thoroughbred championship horses, to be exact. So here at the bottom, we have Mage, winner of this year's Kentucky Derby. But we also have the winners of the other 2 big horse racing events in the US. And what do you know? All 3 horses are closely related in that they can all be traced back to a horse named Mr. Prospector. Also descending from Mr. Prospector is Pepper's Pride, who was undefeated in over 15 races. That's what that little star means. And American Pharoah, who won the Triple Crown in 2015, meaning that he won all 3 of the major US races in 1 year. Something that another related horse, named Affirmed, also did back in 1978. Both Mr. Prospector and Affirmed are descendants of a horse named Native Dancer, who was born in 1950. Now that's all very interesting, but here's the thing that blows my mind. We can go back even further along the male line, with lots of photos along the way. Let's see how far we can go. I'm going to read the names because they're quite fun. We've got Polynesian, Unbreakable, Sickle, Pharos, Phalaris, Polemius, Selene, Bonavista, and guess what? We're only halfway there. There's also Bendor, Doncaster, Stockwell, The Baron, Birdcatcher, Sir Hercules, Whalebone, Waxy, and here's my favorite name, Potatoes. Then there's Eclipse, Marsk Squirt, Bartlett's Childers, and finally, Darley Arabia, who lived way back in the early 1700s. I mean, look at how big this chart is. It's crazy. However, I do want to mention something that the designer wrote when he posted this chart. Horse racing can actually be quite cruel and really should be abolished. So take note that this chart is not meant to celebrate the so-called sport, but rather to demonstrate how exploitative it is. Okay, moving on. Next up is this timeline of Australia, modeled on my timelines of US history and Canadian history. And this one is full of information. I like how it starts off with this bendy yellow timeline so that it can show the Aboriginals arriving, perhaps as far back as 65,000 years ago. Near the top, it also shows what sea levels were like back then, as well as how diverse the continent ended up being, with around 250 Aboriginal languages spoken. The rest of the chart covers European colonization and is divided by region. The thick blue line here represents the Australian Federation in 1901, when the 6 colonies became the 6 states. To the right, there's also this series of maps which show the territorial evolution over time. And in the middle, you've got the evolution of the Australian flag. So overall, very comprehensive and useful for anyone interested in Australian history. The next chart is even more closely based on one of my own. Basically, someone created an evolution of Arabic chart in the exact same style as my evolution of the Latin alphabet chart. The first 2 lines are exactly the same because virtually all alphabets and abjads descend from Phoenician, which in turn came from Proto-Sinaitic. However, from the 3rd line onwards, we go in a different direction, passing through Aramaic, which was used by the Achaemenid Persians, and then Nabatean, which was used by the builders of Petra, before arriving at one of the earliest Arabic scripts, known as Hijazi. We then get the Kufic Arabic script, which was used for early versions of the Quran, before finally coming to the Nashq script, which developed around 900 CE and is the basis for the main Arabic script used today. However, you'll note that many of the modern letters now have dots, and that several more letters were eventually added, bringing the final total up to 28. At the bottom, the designer has also included some notes on special diacritics, the evolution of numbers, and how letters are joined. Returning to family trees, the next one covers every major state in the ancient Near East, from 730 BCE to 30 BCE. So you've got the Assyrians at the top. Note that Assyria includes a stripe of orange because it also controlled Babylon. But then it gets followed by the Neo-Babylonians and then the Achaemenid Persians. I like how Cyrus the Great is shown centered and really big because his rise to power was a real game changer. Note that the Persian emperors eventually get a stripe of yellow because they conquered Egypt and thus became pharaohs as well. But take note that this chart also includes some smaller states, such as Lydia in Asia Minor, with its famous king Croesus, remembered for his extreme wealth. I also really like how a map of the Achaemenid Empire is shown, but on top of a map that looks like how they would have understood the world at the time. Below that, we get Alexander the Great, and then all the various successor states that emerged after his death, before finally we get Julius Caesar and the birth of the Roman Empire. There's also a nice timeline and some great images along the bottom, as well as at the top. So overall, this is a really great resource for anyone studying ancient history. Moving on to the medieval period, this next chart shows all the various Welsh monarchs from around 400 CE to 1500 CE. So often England and Scotland get all the attention, with Wales being mostly forgotten. So it's nice to see a chart that focuses exclusively on it. Now, the main thing you'll notice is that there was never really a single United Kingdom of Wales. Instead, Wales was home to several small kingdoms, the borders of which were constantly shifting, which is why these maps on the side have been included. I also really like this image of Queen Elizabeth and Charles at the bottom, with Charles being invested as the Prince of Wales back in 1969. Kind of ties things together, reminding us why that particular title is used by the heir to the throne of the UK. But overall, what I like the most about this chart is that it just looks really nice. Not too crowded, but not too sparse either. And that subtle background image makes it look really professional. Next, I had to give a shout out to the creator of this chart, who was runner-up last year for his chart about African monarchs, and who has made several more poster-sized charts during 2023, such as this one, focusing exclusively on imperial trees. Imperial is one step up from royal and is used only for those who hold the title of emperor. What's nice about this chart is that it includes emperors from all over the world, all on one chart. So if we go to the middle and start on the right, we see that there are Chinese emperors from East Asia, Mughal emperors from India, Ottoman emperors from the Middle East, Ethiopian emperors and Mali emperors from Africa, of course, Holy Roman emperors from Europe, But look, there's also the Aztec emperors and the Inca emperors, all the way over in the pre-Columbian Americas, and much, much more as well. So basically, the entire world is covered. Nice. Okay, we've now come to my final pick, which is this chart titled Alternative Successions to the English and British Crown. If you've been following this channel for a while, you'll know that I used to do a lot of Who Would Be King videos, where I looked at various scenarios which might have taken place if history had gone in a different direction. To date, I've looked at 3 scenarios relating to the United Kingdom. And what's nice about this chart is it shows all of them on one page. So here on the left in blue, we have the scenario where Richard III is followed by his Plantagenet brother George, instead of by the Tudors. This line leads to Simon Abney Hastings, whose father was featured in the documentary Britain's Real Monarch. Simon was actually present and an active participant at King Charles's coronation. I was hoping that we might end up with a duel, but alas, that didn't happen. Next, in purple, is the Jacobite succession. This one is the most well-known, and in fact, there is an organization that exists to this day that claims that this line is the true legitimate one. It starts with James II's son, James the Pretender, who was skipped over in favor of the Hanoverians. If it weren't for the Act of Settlement in 1701, the throne actually would have gone in this direction, and Franz, the current Duke of Bavaria, would currently be Francis II of the UK. This would also mean that we might have gotten our first openly gay European monarch. But alas, once again, this was not meant to be. Third, there's a scenario in which Henry VIII's will could have been followed, meaning that the line would have gone through his sister Mary instead of Margaret. If we follow that one, the green one, we end up with a woman named Teresa Freeman Grenville. Finally, this chart also includes a 4th scenario, shown in yellow, in which Anne Stanley is appointed heir. In this case, we currently have a queen named Caroline. All right, those were just some of my own personal favorites. It's now time to take a look at the top 10 Reddit posts based on upvotes. This year, the only ones I'm going to skip are joke posts and announcements. Everything else is fair game, and multiple posts by the same creator will be allowed. So with that criteria, here's number 10. It's a massive chart of the German royal family tree. If it hadn't made the top 10, this definitely would have been one of my picks. It looks a lot like my European royal family tree West chart, but it focuses exclusively on German monarchies. However, it not only covers the Holy Roman Emperors and later German emperors, it also includes the monarchs of smaller states, such as Saxony and Bavaria. It even includes the princes of Liechtenstein, who still reign today. That's one of the few European monarchies that I've never covered on the channel. So if you want to see that tree, you'll want to check out this chart. Next up is a personal family tree, and a very large one at that. It was made by the father, shown on the chart, but includes both sides of his child's family. I won't zoom in because there's a lot of information about private individuals here. Although, take note that the images and names of all living persons have already been whited out, something that is required on the subreddit for all charts featuring everyday individuals. But shout out to this designer for the work he put into making his own family tree. Very well done. For number 8, we're back to the topic of religion. Here we have a chart of all the current Christian patriarchs. If you remember from my series on Christian denominations, originally there were only 5 patriarchs, based on the 5 most important centers of Christianity during the first few centuries CE. Today, in most cases, there is more than one person who claims to be the legitimate head of each patriarchate, except for Rome. There, the only patriarch is the Pope. However, what I didn't mention in my video is that nowadays there are several other patriarchates located throughout the world, meaning, for example, that there's now a patriarch of Venice and a patriarch of Georgia. Mostly what I enjoy about this chart, though, is looking at the wide variety of headgear worn by all these different patriarchs. I mean, some of them are really quite epic. It gives you a real sense of the differences in culture and tradition. Okay, coming in at number 7 is another personal family tree, but one that shows a very close connection back to royalty. Now, as I've mentioned several times on the channel, most people are somehow related to royalty if you go back far enough. So that in itself is nothing special. But most people usually have to go back at least 800 years before they hit someone with a really high title, like king or prince. In contrast, this person was able to hit royalty in less than 300 years, which is actually quite remarkable and rare. Their 9 times great-grandmother was a member of the House of Bourbon, a branch of the House of Capet, which was the royal house of France for over 800 years, and in my opinion, the greatest European royal house of all time. You can see here that Louise Adelaide de Bourbon had an illegitimate son, and it's from that illegitimate son that the designer of this chart descends. So while that makes them ineligible to sit on the throne of France, which is now defunct anyway, it doesn't take away from the real biological connection that exists. Okay, number 6. This one is a chart explaining the difference between a queen regnant, who is herself the reigning monarch, and a queen consort, who is simply the wife of a currently reigning king. This is important because very recently the UK went from having a queen who was a queen regnant to a queen who is a queen consort. However, this chart also describes some other types of queens and gives an example for each, including a queen regent, not to be confused with regnant, a queen mother, a queen dowager, and a queen emerita. Now, as you can see, this next chart looks very similar to the previous one. That's because it was made by the same person, who, by the way, also made the earlier German royal family trees chart, and one more to come. So this creator, who goes by the name The Real Scorpion, got 4 posts in the top 10. Well done. This one shows all the various ranks used by European monarchs in order of seniority. Generally speaking, emperor is the highest title. However, this chart shows the Pope above that, which could be debated. In fact, this was something that was debated during the Middle Ages and resulted in several wars. In the end, it was kind of understood that the emperor and pope were on equal footing. Plus, after the Reformation, the whole issue became less important because many German states ended up becoming Protestant. Anyway, the rest of the chart gives the other ranks as well as an example of each. So, very useful indeed. For number 4, we move into the realm of fiction. A while back, I did a video about the longest reigning monarchs in world history. Well, this one is a riff on that. It takes a look at the longest reigning fictional monarchs, who obviously beat out the real monarchs. At the top is Enmenluana, a figure from the Sumerian Kings List, which is a real historical thing, but obviously greatly exaggerated, because it says this king reigned for 43,200 years. So while Enmenluana could have been a real king, he's generally seen as being a legendary character. We then get a character from Tolkien's Silmarillion and a bunch of other monarchs, some of whom I'm familiar with and others not so much. I'm sure there are probably some literary or game-based characters that were missed. So if you want to get in on the debate, you'll want to head over to the Reddit post and comment. But before I move on, I do want to give a special shout out to the creator of this chart, who goes by Eastward King. He posts a lot of great content on the subreddit, and I'm pretty sure he's our most prolific chart creator on there. So you'll want to check out his other stuff. We now come to the final post by The Real Scorpion, which surprisingly was only posted 2 days before I'm recording this video. But it's already at number 3. It may continue to climb higher, so maybe someone can let us know in the comments if it did. This chart is a nice companion to the 2 videos I did about who would be monarchs of Germany today. Germany was a complicated monarchy because it was actually comprised of several monarchies, 1 emperor, but also 4 additional kings and many more grand dukes, dukes, and princes. This chart shows the flag of each state, as well as who the final monarch was in 1918. Okay, number 2. This one is not technically a chart, but I included it because it is a genealogy. It claims to show how US President Joe Biden is a descendant of the Norse god Odin. So obviously the top part of this chart is fictional, but most of it is actually historical, although I can't confirm whether or not it is accurate. I know that the bottom part is up to at least the two Thomas Taylors, but after that it gets quite sketchy. While it's true that if you go back far enough, most people are related to royalty, knowing exactly how is often quite difficult. And the internet is full of unreliable sources. Sites like genie.com are notorious for providing links that haven't been fact-checked. So just keep that in mind. All right, here we go. The top post on the Useful Charts subreddit for 2023. In fact, currently, this is also the top post of all time. How is King Charles III related to other European royals who will likely attend the coronation? Timely topics always do well on social media platforms. So my thinking is that the algorithm probably showed this chart to other people outside of the subreddit, which is great because it probably introduced some new people to what's going on in r/usefulcharts. Anyway, I won't go through the chart in detail because I've already done something similar on the channel, but I will point out that this particular chart includes many of the heirs of the now defunct monarchies, such as Romania and Yugoslavia. So it's definitely worth checking out. Okay, the final thing I want to do in this video is announce the winners of the 2023 Useful Charts Reddit contest. Once again, we have two winners, and their prize is going to be that their charts will be printed by the Useful Charts company, and we're going to share the profit from the sales of those charts with them. When it came to choosing the winner, I did things a little differently this year. I asked some other history YouTubers to make the final choice. So the judges included Jack Rackham, Emperor Tigerstar, Mr. Beat, M. Laser, History Time, and the Cynical Historian. And here's the result. The runner-up is the German Royal Family Tree by The Real Scorpion. We'll be printing 100 of these as a limited edition print. So if you want to grab a copy, you can do so now by heading over to UsefulCharts.com and looking in the Royal Family Tree section. And the first prize goes to the Welsh Monarchs Family Tree by Sakura Anglican. We'll be printing 200 of these, again as a limited edition. So don't wait. If you want to get a copy, head over to UsefulCharts.com right now. All right, that's it for me for 2023. Hope you had a good year. I'll see you in 2024.